Hey guys, this is just going to be one of a couple of videos I'm going to do about tactics and training. I've had a few people in my Twitch channel ask me about it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a couple of different formations that seem to be popular, and not just say that this is a great formation, but actually give some reasonings why. The tactic that you can see on the screen here is a tactic that I've been using since I've started playing FM2012. It's basically a 4-5-1. Initially I kept the form the same, but some of the things I changed were some of the roles that people had. So let me just load up a new one so I can make changes to it and not have it permanent. Okay, so what I originally had was I actually had this guy as a ball-winning midfielder and as a support. And the problem that I found was that it seemed very defense heavy. And a way you can kind of see how your formation is going is actually to go to a previous game that you've played. So if you just go to fixtures, I've used last season. Let's take this for example. And if you click on it and then go to stats, analysis, and what it will do is it will generate the match report and it will actually show you both teams. And what this will actually tell you is a lot of important information. So if we start from the top, it will tell you shots. So who on your team, you can do it for all players, but it might get a bit jumbled later on. So if you do it for select players, it will tell you shots, if they're on target, where they shot from, where it ended up. So you missed the net, whether it was blocked, hit the woodwork, half a chance, saved, whether it was a goal, whatever. So that gives you a lot of information as well. Passes. This is why I said you might want to do it on select players only, because with all players it just looks like a kid's taking a crayon to a piece of paper. So this is very helpful because it will give you a lot of information about things like pass completion rate, who's had a lot of passes, how many of them were completed, how many of them were key passes. So for example with this guy you can see that even though he is only 20 and he only has like a 10 in passing at the moment, he has good flair, good decisions, we'll say decent flair, decent decisions, and decent anticipation. You can see that even with such a low passing rate, he still had 78% of his passes complete, with 2 of them being key, and only 2 of them being intercepted as well. And you can also see sort of the range of passes that they're trying as well. So if you're trying, say, a direct passing tactic, you can see how well it's working. If your team doesn't have good enough passing, then you might consider changing that to a shorter passing. And also, like if you've done a shout as well, where you say that you want to have your team try killer passes or get the ball forward, basically just means you're going to do longer passes, and you can see how successful that was. And you can also get a good idea of who's sort of acting as like the engine room in your tactic. Like this guy has, once again, decent passing, decent anticipation, good determination for the class of player that's out there. And he's only had really sort of 1 shot out of play and 1 shot intercepted. The rest of them, for the most, in 1 shot, 2 shots out of play, 1 intercepted. And he's still actually done a pretty good job on passing the ball around, and actually a fair distance as well. So he looks like he's going to be a decent player for the future. The other nice thing that I like as well, crosses you might not get that many. I'm actually thinking of telling him to turn off crosses, but a lot of those might have been, a couple of those are corners or free kicks. So as you can see, his free kick taking isn't fantastic. Falls under could be better, I think. Once again with fouls, tackles, so that's quite handy to see how good your players are at the actual tackling side of it. Maybe if you have a weak link somewhere on maybe someone who consistently misses tackles, you can possibly consider increasing the training for it, or maybe just moving them out of that position and finding a replacement for them. Same with headers as well. You can see how successful they were in and where they managed to do it. Scoring chances, that's quite handy to see. Who's missing sort of clear-cut chances. And once again, that might make you consider looking at things like composure and things like that. If they're getting clear-cut chances and they're missing it, they might have very low composure. So once again, you can use that as an individual training focus to try and improve that. Another big thing I like in this is average positions, and we'll put it on for all players. So that gives you an idea of the average positions of where your players were. Now, this is a little jumbled because it has a lot of players in a friendly who were subbed. But you can see it almost keeps the form of what my original tactic was. One up front, two at the wings, two central midfielders, a defensive midfielder, and four at the back. And you can see that a lot of the tactic is down the middle. So if you want to, what I'll do is actually I want to use a division game where there's not going to be as many changes, just to get a better idea. So that wasn't really a fair judgment. There we go. So that looks a bit better. That kind of almost looks like the tactic, just about. So if I want to see the average positions of, say, my striker, you can see that he's pretty much straight down the middle and in the areas that you need him to be. For my wingers, you can see that he's down the wing, but he doesn't box himself into the corner, and he's also there at the side when you need to. Like on the right, same thing. So if you're finding that your players aren't going to positions that you need them to be, you can use this as a good opportunity to look at the tactic in a different light without having to watch the whole game and see what's happening. Also movement as well. That's quite handy to see what sort of runs they're trying to make. Now obviously with this I've set my tactic to say I don't want them dribbling at all, because they just don't physically have the agility, the ball control, and the dribbling, and the technique, and the first touch to be able to run past their opponent that well. And it also prevents them sort of running themselves into a corner. So I mean, that's one tactic that you can use. For the get rid of that. For the team instructions I'm using, it's a fluid philosophy with control. So the idea being is we're going to hold on to the ball, direct passing, and sort of the thing that you really need to have with direct passing is a deep defensive line. The idea being is that you want to pull your attackers into your final third as much as they can to then create space behind you. And the idea being is that you'll have a couple of players who have good passing and good vision to be able to get the ball forward, and good players with speed and first touch and technical abilities to be able to get onto the ball and then get past their man or cause havoc at least in the opposition's defense, and then hopefully get a goal like a one-on-one or something, or maybe draw defenders over to the side so then they create space for one of your wingers or your poacher to pop the ball into the back of the net. More expressive, I'm trying to stack my team now with a little bit of flair, so there is a little bit more expression in it. But if you find that they're trying to do stuff that's a little bit too fancy, you might want to dial that back to default. Closing down, I normally choose default. I don't want to choose press more, because you'll find that unless you have a very good team, they'll get pulled out of position and create gaping holes. So for example, if a striker ends up sort of moving over there, you might have your fullback and your centre back to try and close them down, thus leaving an empty space there for another striker, or a midfielder with run from deep, or say an attacking midfielder coming into that open space. Tackling, I normally set on default. I find if you set on aggressive, you'll get a lot of red cards. You can maybe individually set that on a per game basis if you want to try and break up a better team's passing, or a team that's going to try and pass the ball around and play a possession type game. But it's really down to personal choice. Just use it with caution is what I say. Marking, I'm actually a fan of zonal marking instead of man marking. I find that with man marking you need to have very good defenders and players with a good marking, positioning, anticipation and decisions. And just at the level that I'm playing at the moment, I don't have it. Now, on saying that, there are player instructions set for my central defender to have zonal marking but tightly mark them. And if you wanted to, you could set this guy maybe to man marking, because he's sort of, in this tactic, he's acting as an anchor man. But the nice thing that I like with zonal marking is that if, say, my fullback gets pulled out of position, my anchor man goes and covers that position. Same with like a defender. If he gets pulled out of position, the anchor man drops into that space and fills up the gap that's been created. So I really like using an anchor man, especially in this tactic. Roaming, I set to default. Once again, you can set that to your own personal preference in the player instructions. I mean, I'd say if I was going to do it, I might maybe set my wingers to roam. But once again, you know, I like them staying on the wing because there's a chance they might pull a defender out of position, and then have room for my poacher. One other player instruction I've done, which is slightly different, is I actually set this guy to move into channels. So he'll actually move between the fullback and the central defender. So the idea being is we'll actually have almost a fourth attacker, and he's a playmaker as well. So. And I think having the anchorman here and a guy who's only in a support role will give enough support that we don't get hit on the counterattack. That's the other thing to look for. If you find that your team's getting hit on the break a lot and you've only got 2 or 3 men back, you've got too many people in attack. Like I said before, defensive line, if you're going to be playing direct football, you want a deep defensive line. Obviously, the opposite of that, if you're playing short passing, you want to have a high defensive line. You don't want them to start short passing all the way back at the byline, because it's just not worth it, you know, or the goal line, sorry. You want them to be pushed up more so they don't have to pass the ball as much. But it is a little bit more technically proficient type of football, so obviously you've got to be aware of the players that you have. And it might be worthwhile considering as well, like the team that I have here doesn't have great passing, so if I start noticing a lot of interceptions in that, and the fact that the pitch that we're using is in very poor conditions, it's very bumpy, it's not very good for long passes, it might be something I'd consider. Ideally, I'm going to change the team into having more passing, but that's really down to personal preference. It is something I'm considering, though. And probably if I was going to do it, I would set it up as another tactic here, so they can start learning it with all the rest of them, and then once they're happy with it, I'll then switch them over to it so they know how to do it, or if I need to switch over to it, I can. The only 2 tactics I have here are actually exactly the same tactic, with the only being is that it has a different strategy. One being attacking, one being control. I normally don't select any shouts at the start of it, but I find a good combination of shouts to use if you're playing control football is retain possession, pass defeat, and play through defense. I find that if they run at defense, there's more chance that they're going to try and run a defender and lose the ball. If I was going to do another tactic, let's say let's try a 4-2-2-2, which is actually a tactic I've used before, and this is actually very much a Brazilian style tactic. And probably what I would do with this is I would definitely go with fluid strategy. I would say attacking, because you know they don't really ever play defensive football in Brazil, do they? With short passing, and obviously because of that, we want to have a high defensive line. Width, we're not really worried too much about, because I'll explain that in a minute. Tempo, I'm a bit worried about using quick, because there's a higher chance that they'll lose the ball because they're trying to do one-touch passes. So I normally put just 1 notch below quick. Time wasting, it's fine at rarely. I mean, the only time I would change that is if, say, if you're playing against better opposition and you've managed to sneak a 1-0 lead into the 70th minute. Then I would move to sort of control strategy, retain possession, pass defeat, play through defense, and then increase the time wasting. So we can basically play possession football. If they try and get the ball off of us, then there's a chance that they might fall over at the first touch, or just pass the ball around and cause the opposition to chase after them. Focused passing is fine at mix. Counterattack, you don't really need to because you're playing short passing. You're not really going to have a quick counterattack. Play offside, yes, that's fine. The only time that would ever change is if you had the defenders that could play, for example, as a stopper or cover. A stopper is basically a guy that will go up and try and stop the ball before it gets to your defensive line, and a cover guy is a guy who will try and sweep up any balls coming through. Creative freedom, more expressive. Closing down is fine at default. Tackling is fine. Marking, zonal. Crossing, fine at default. Roaming, we're actually going to leave at default, and I'll explain why. What I would do with this is I'd set one guy as a target man attack, and the other guy as a poacher attack. Well, actually, sorry. Well, I'd say advance forward. Sorry, complete forward if I could get it as a support. Just for the fact that with your complete forward, he basically will drop into that space there to get the ball, and your target man will also sort of get the ball and be attacking in his mind, but he'll also open up space for this guy to move into. But the thing to remember is it isn't that easy, especially at lower leagues, to get someone who could fulfill all the abilities they need to be a complete forward. If you can't get that, then I might say change it to something like maybe a poacher and trequartista. Because then he will drop into the holes behind, and the poacher will be there to get onto the ball. But once again, you still need a fair amount of mental stats to be a trequartista. The other thing you got to remember as well is you got to be careful with using a trequartista and a complete forward if you're playing with an attacking midfielder, because what you're basically asking to do is the striker to drop into the space that your attacking midfielder is in, and obviously, as everybody knows, two objects cannot maintain or cannot exist in the same space. For your midfield, I would probably have one set as an attacking playmaker, attack, and a central midfielder support. Set one of my guys to an anchor man, so he'll basically support that, defensive midfielder support. What I would also do is I would actually set the instructions for this guy, these two, to actually roam. Now the reason I do that is it will then naturally start giving you width in your team. Basically the idea is that your goalie is going to distribute it to the defender. You can choose either right or left, it doesn't make too much of a difference. And the idea being is that this is actually something that I do in all of my tactics. I set the defender collect for the goalie, because there's nothing worse than you get the ball, you hoof it forward, and it goes straight to the opposition. I also turn off long shots in all my tactics. There's nothing worse as well than getting your player here and trying to do his best impression of Suarez's goal or Cisse's goal from 25 yards out, thinking, oh, I'm going to hit this on the outside of my foot, it's going to go in the top corner, and it actually ends up in the parking lot. Possession is the name of the game. Whenever I make a tactic, I want to be in control of the ball. I want to pass the ball around. I want to, I don't want to just rely on set pieces to score from. So this is why I do it. If we have the ball, we have a much greater chance of scoring. And if the reason we lose the ball is because of a technical skill, well, then that's something that can be improved upon. I don't want to lose it for silly reasons. So, defender collect. So the idea being is that this guy here will get the ball, and because this guy is roaming, they'll basically be taking the ball up either this side or this side of the pitch, and then pulling the opposition team over to this side, creating space for your people here at the side. It actually is quite nice looking. The reason why I didn't stick with this in the new save that I've been doing is there were so many wingers that you have to overlook because of it, that I thought, it kind of works, and I played well with Inter with it, and I played well with when I was with Notts County with it, but there's so many wingers that I really wanted to play that I couldn't. So I thought I'll try it differently. I'm going to try and experiment and play with a 4-5-1 instead. So that's something to consider. General rules of thumb to remember. Just sort of do this as a summary now. Let me get rid of that. I'll even do like a standard 4-4-2. That's a good standard English tactic. As soon as I can find it. Say 4-4-2. Right, the things to remember is you want an even amount of people attacking and even amount of people defending. So, five defensive-minded people, 5 attacking-minded people. No, obviously your back 4 will be defensive, and you can even set that to support if you don't have really quick fullbacks. So that's normally going to mean you're going to have your 4 across the back, so 2 central defenders, 2 fullbacks, and either an anchorman, defensive midfielder, or a central midfielder who's going to be defensive-minded. So even if you change that to like a ball-winning midfielder, or even a box-to-box, but those are rare to find. You're going to have 5 on attack, so either 1 striker or 2 strikers, or sorry, 1 striker and a couple of wingers, or 2 strikers, a midfielder, and a couple of wingers. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have all-out attack. I mean, even having this guy in a support role means that he's going to be more attacking-minded. Remember the general rules. If you're playing direct passing, you want to have a deep defensive line. If you're playing short passing, you want to have a high defensive line. There's obviously other things to look at. What you don't want to do is have, for example, say you do a deep defensive line and you set your passing style to direct. Great. What you don't want to do, for example, is set your passing through the middle. Because you've got wingers here. You want to use them. If you set your time wasting too often and using direct passing, you're never going to go on a break. You're never going to have a counterattack because you're going to be wasting time trying to get the ball passed around, which is going to give the opposition time to reorganize their defense. Be very careful using the tempo. If you're finding that you're losing the ball a lot when you have a quick tempo, just turn it down a notch to just below quick. Player instructions. There's a lot of stuff that you can do in here. I mean, like you can go in and tell them to turn off your long shots, turn off run with the ball. You can play around with things like running from deep. If you're worried about your defense not really getting back in time because they're slow, you can maybe change their mentality to more defensive, so they don't get as far forward. That way they don't have as far to run back. If you find that you have a guy who's giving the ball up too much, you can then reduce their creative freedom down a lot and not affect the whole team. And things like that. I mean, there's so many little things that you can tweak in there that will change the way that your team plays. If the guy doesn't have great passing, you can reduce his through balls from often to maybe rarely or sometimes. Long shots, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of it. If you want to change around how they're crossing the ball in, so if you want, instead of crossing the byline, you want to cross them deep because you have quick strikers. Mixed aims is normally fine. If you're finding that your strikers are running off into a corner, they might have hug touch line, for example, set, which just basically means that they're going to run themselves into a corner, which might be good if you have something like an attacking midfielder here who has, for example, if you did hug touch line, hug touch line, basically cause them to go into the corner there and maybe pull the defense out of the way, and then your attacking midfielder has room to move in. So there's a lot of options there. There's a lot of good reading as well on the SI Games official forums. Like I said, if you do have any other questions at all, by all means you can come to my channel at Twitch TV. I'll post the link below. And I'm quite willing to look at your tactic, see what you have, look at your team instructions, make suggestions, offer ideas on what you can do. The next video I'm going to do is about training. It's going to concentrate on making individual training instructions, different ways that you can do it, either individual ones or group ones, and it's talking about personality and the importance of personality as well, and how it does make a big difference to the development of your of your players and what you kind of want to aim for, and to show it even is possible with lower league teams that don't have great facilities. I hope you found this useful. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave your comments below. Like I said, this is something people have been asking for a while, and I will catch you soon. I'm going to try and update these sort of maybe once a day, and please come over to my Twitch channel and help give me some support.